Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to Athens to talk about TTIP. Well, I was asked to talk only 10 minutes and to do some introductory remarks. So perhaps many questions will be left open after I have spoken, but anyway, after this short discussion here on the panel, you have lots of time to ask whatever you are interested in. So a TTIP, as you can see here above me, means a transatlantic trade and investment partnership, which means, and this is really very important, that this treaty has two parts. One is trade and one is investment. And it is very important to distinguish these two aspects of the treaty. Now, to start with trade, the very strange thing about the whole endeavor to start a free trade agreement is that trade between the EU and the USA is already flourishing. You know, every day, every single day, goods worth 1.8 billion euros are shipped across the Atlantic. So you can see that the EU and the US are the best customers of each other. So if trade is already flourishing, why do you need TTIP? This is a question that arises specifically because even the EU Commission admits that TTIP will not have any growth effects. You know, the EU Commission did a study, what will happen if TTIP was enacted, and the result was that till 2027, in the next 14 years, there will be a growth in the EU of 0.5%, not per year. That's all the growth that is to be expected. So per year, that would be just 0.036%. Now, that is even below the margin of error. You know how unreliable any kind of forecast is when it comes to the economy. So it might be that there will be no growth at all. And even if there's growth, because you know the study, of course, tried to be as positive as it could, the growth that will be due to TTIP will be very, very small. And that's not really astonishing, because even right now, there are hardly any duties left between the US and the EU. Just to give you some numbers, the duties that the US requests are about 3.5% on average, and the EU has customs of about 5.2%. So, you know, you can see the trade is already flowing quite freely. So the question really is, why should we have TTIP? Now, the official ideology or the official reasoning by the EU Commission is that it is all about non-tariff barriers that are product regulations that are supposedly hindering the exchange of goods. Now, what is a non-tariff barrier? An example that's often cited is the car industry. For example, in Germany, wing mirrors have to fold in, and the US, they don't. So, and the German car industry came up with 5,000 different regulations they would like to harmonize. But of course, even now, you know, the companies could live with these different regulations across the Atlantic, you know, because what they did was just to build two versions. One car for the European market and another one for the American market, and it worked out very well. That's exactly why no one expects to have any growth thanks to TTIP. Now, I don't want to talk anymore about TTIP or about the official ideology. I'd like to point out what's problematic about TTIP according to the critics. Basically, it's 3 points. The first point is that the negotiations are done secretly. There is absolutely no information on what is being talked about during the negotiation rounds. We have had 5 negotiation rounds up to now. You know, TTIP started 2013. The last negotiation round was held in Washington, and Debbie can tell you more about that because she was present more or less in front of the doors. But what happened during these 5 negotiation rounds, no one really knows. But the strange thing is, while the public is kept in the dark, the lobbyists, you know, the representatives of the corporations, are continuously informed. And, you know, one of the NGOs in Brussels, they forced the EU Commission to open their files, disclosing with whom they had met, because, you know, we have this Free Information Act, and they used that, went to court to get at least some information about who the EU Commission had been meeting. And then, you know, they gathered dates for the time from January 2012 till April 2013. And it turned out that the EU Commission had met at least 119 times with lobbyists, but that consumer and environmental organizations were heard only 11 times. So you can see that the lobbyists or the representatives of the corporations really have much more influence on the EU Commission than the normal public does. So this is the first problem, that there is a lot of secrecy, which enables, of course, the lobbyists to have a lot of influence. Well, the second danger is a different danger, but amounts to the same in the long run. That is that TTIP is designed as a living agreement, as it's called. That's something Debbie will also enlarge on, I think. But just to start, a living agreement means that it's not only about the present, but also about the future. So there are 2 steps. Step 1 is that you have a treaty agreeing on all the standards you can easily negotiate, because they are very similar anyway. This would be, for example, these wing mirrors in the car industry. Of course, it's not very difficult to somehow agree how a wing mirror should look like. Everything that's somehow difficult is left out in order to get an agreement in the first place. Then, the second step, that's an important step. In the treaty, it's also agreed that in future, any new law has to be checked whether it has a major impact on trade. Now, any law you can think of might have a major impact on trade, not only tax laws, but also, for example, laws on minimum wage, environmental protection laws, laws to protect consumer rights, everything you can think of, even social security laws, everything you can think of could have a major impact on trade. Now, this, of course, is very attractive for the corporations on both sides of the Atlantic. If they had this kind of living agreement, that every single law has to be checked whether it has a major impact on trade, then they could very early on start with their lobbyist activities. And not only that, they would always have to be heard at the very early stage, they would also be entitled to do their lobbyism on both sides of the Atlantic. Because right now, of course, European companies lobby a lot in Brussels. You all know that they have offices there in order to influence the Parliament and the Commission. But right now, for European corporations, it's very difficult to have influence in Washington, and the other way around, US companies find it kind of hard to get their interests recognized by the EU Commission. That would change, you know, they would have to be heard on both sides of the Atlantic at a very early stage. Again, such a living agreement would be extremely undemocratic. No? We have this problem of the secrecy of the negotiations, and then again you have the danger that it might be a living agreement. Now, in the third problem that arises with TTIP has to do with this second part of the treaty, with the investment. No, it's the first 2 problems which I say has more to do with trade. Now the third problem somehow gets tricky when it comes to investment. And that is, you know, that a TTIP is also to include investment protection clauses. And these investment protection clauses are extremely controversial in Europe and are the main reason why the resistance is growing in many countries. Now, what are these investment clauses about? They only pertain to foreign investments, to direct investments. They do not apply for domestic investments done by domestic firms. Now, what would happen is that, for example, a US company could sue an EU member state if they fear for their investments. They could appeal to an international court of arbitration. What is important, these international courts are no normal courts as you are used to know them. It's not a legal building with lawyers and judges who work full-time applying the laws of the country. It's something completely different. They are tribunals that convene ad hoc. So it's usually, you know, when a company fears for its investments and starts to appeal to a court of arbitration, then the first thing that happens is that 3 members are chosen, which are newly appointed each time. So they are not professional judges, but they are lawyers that are appointed more or less by chance. And then you have a representative of the investor, a representative of the state that's sued, and a mediator on which both parties agreed. Now, what's the problem with this kind of procedure? The first thing is that a government can be sued to pay a compensation, even if the government treats the foreign and the domestic investors equally. You know, the foreign investors have the possibility to sue a country twice. They can go to the domestic courts, but they also can go to the international courts of arbitration, whereas the domestic investor, like, say, a Greek investor being angry about the Greek government, they can only sue the Greek government in front of Greek courts. But the foreign investors, they have both possibilities. So now the interesting question is, of course, when can a foreign investor decide to sue a state? And that is also a very vague issue. All an investor has to do is to believe that he will be indirectly expropriated. Now, what does that mean? That can mean anything. For example, if just a theoretical example, if Greece decided to raise its minimum wage, which would be, I think, very necessary because now the minimum wage in Greece is so low, and if you had these investment protection clauses already in place and signed, then of course investors from outside, they could claim that the raised minimum wage in Greece would endanger their own profits, and they could claim, well, we only invested in Greece because we thought that the minimum wage is so low. So then they could sue Greece to pay a compensation because their profits were somehow diminished, according to these investors. The same applies to every other regulation a government can decide on, like consumer and environmental protection, land and raw material use, social security systems, anything. Now, this means that a country, in a way, is rendered powerless. No, it can't pass any new laws if it doesn't want to pay compensation. Now, that this is not just theory, you can see in Germany, because as you possibly know, Germany decided to stop its nuclear power plants after the catastrophe of Fukushima in Germany, which has very many nuclear power plants, said, okay, we will end using nuclear power. And then 8 of the 17 plants we have had to be taken from the electricity network, or to be shut down. Now, it was 8 power plants that had to be shut down, but 2 of them belonged to a Swedish company called Vattenfall. And Vattenfall then sued Germany in front of a court of arbitration for a compensation of 3.7 billion euro. So the case is not yet settled, but the probability is very high that Germany has to pay. And the other, but only Vattenfall could go to court of arbitration. All the other companies in Germany that had nuclear power plants, because they were German, had to apply to German courts. And only Vattenfall has this privilege of taking an extra course. And what I'd like to finish with saying that I think that Greece is extremely exposed to the danger of having investors suing Greece if it signed TTIP, because for 2 reasons that somehow in a combination make Greece really very vulnerable. The first is due to the euro crisis. Whatever you think about it, but it will be reality, due to the euro crisis, the Greek government will have to sell off a lot of its public assets to foreign investors. And apart from that, even from selling off the public assets, Greece will also be forced to attract as much direct investments from outside as it can. You are very dependent on foreign money. Now, so there will be lots of foreign investors in Greece. And at the same time, that's the second problem. Of course, the government will have to intervene permanently into the social and economic structure to alleviate the crisis. No, the government cannot just sit there and do nothing. But any law that helps the population could be viewed as an indirect expropriation by foreign investors that could claim then that somehow their profits were diminished. And I think that Greece really should not take this risk, that in the end it will be forced to pay millions, or as the German case shows, even billions, to foreign investors just because you signed TTIP. So I think there are good reasons for Greece to stop TTIP as soon as possible. Well, thank you very much. That's for the beginning.